Hello guys, welcome to Physics Grad. In this video we are going to start with a new topic where we are going to see another kind of variational principle called the Maupertuis principle. In the part 1 of this series, we are going to see what is the need of this Maupertuis principle and where it is used and when it is used, and therefore motivate or set up the initial conditions under which Maupertuis principle can be used. Okay, and that is what we are going to do in this video. So before we start, I want to make a comment or a note about the nomenclature used in different literature. Okay, so before we start, a note about nomenclature. So what we have seen so far, okay, what we have seen, I'm going to call it as the variation principle 1, variational principle 1, and this is what we saw in one of the earlier lectures called which we called it as the principle of least action. Okay, so we called it as principle of least action, where we define the action as integral over t1 to t2 times the Lagrangian into dt. Okay, and we varied and the correct path corresponded to the particular path wherein the variation of s about that path was 0, and from this we had derived our Euler-Lagrange equations. Okay, and we called this as the principle of least action. But often in literature, this is also known as Hamilton's principle. This is also known as Hamilton's principle. And the other type of variational principle, which I'm going to call it as 2, variational principle 2, is what we are going to see in this and upcoming series of this topic, which is the Maupertuis principle. Maupertuis principle. Okay, and in some textbooks or in some literatures, this is referred to as principle of least action. Principle of least action. So depending on what textbook you read, sometimes the Hamilton's principle will also be called as principle of least action, or more specifically it should be principle of stationary action, or in other literature the Maupertuis principle will be called as principle of least action. So to avoid confusion, from now on, when I refer to what we have already seen, I am going to call this as the Hamilton's principle, and what we are going to see in this and upcoming videos, I am going to call it as Maupertuis principle, just to avoid confusion with respect to all the different literatures out there. Okay, so just remember, in some literatures Hamilton's principle is also called principle of least action, whereas in some other literatures Maupertuis principle is called principle of least action. And what we are going to do from now on to avoid confusion between these two, we will call what we have studied so far as the Hamilton's principle, and what we are going to see as the Maupertuis principle. All right. So having said that, let us once again, before we look into or setting up the background for where Maupertuis principle is used, we need to again revisit our Hamilton's principle and understand it from a deeper perspective. Okay, so let's do that. So let's revisit Hamilton's principle. and look at some subtle points which we have not covered yet. Okay, so first question, what is this principle used for? Okay, so what is this used for? Well, this is used to get the correct path, okay, among all possible paths that begin and end at specified coordinates and time. So let me write that down. So answer, this is used to get the correct path among all possible paths, by possible I mean virtual paths, okay, which are not necessarily followed by the object, but which we consider or compare it with the correct path and get the variation of S. Okay, that is what I mean by among all possible paths that begin and end at specified coordinates and time. At specified coordinates and time. So what we mean by this is that to apply Hamilton's principle, we need to know where the path or how or what is the initial position and time of the system, and what is the final position and time of the system. So we need to know the initial, that is the beginning and ending specified coordinates of coordinates and time. Okay, that is, we need to know the beginning point and the ending point of all the possible paths, and we vary the action among all these paths, and the path corresponding to the least value of the action, or the path with respect to which the variation is 0, that we called it as the correct path, and from there we developed the Euler-Lagrange equation, which gave us the equations of motion. Okay, this is what it is used for. So this implies that if you consider two-dimensional Cartesian coordinates, just to make it easier to imagine, this means we know x1, y1, t1 and x2, y2, t2, and this position that, or this configuration, I'm going to call it as point 1, and this I'm going to call it as point 2. Okay, so where is this point represented? This is represented in the x, y, t space. Okay, all right, but so we know x1, y1, t1 and x2, y2, t2, but we don't know how the system goes from point 1 to point 2. Okay, but we don't know how the system goes from point 1 to point 2, because there are many possibilities. Among these possibilities, only one of them is the actual path which is followed by the system to go from point 1 to point 2. Possibilities. Okay, whatever, this is possibilities. Okay, but note that all of these paths which we call as the possible paths, okay, should begin at point 1 and end at point 2. That is the meaning of this statement. Okay, so all of these possible paths must begin at 1 and end at 2. Okay, and what does the Hamilton's principle do? The Hamilton's principle chooses the path where the variation of S about the chosen path is 0 in the first order. Okay, so let me write that down. I'm going to soon illustrate this with a diagram. So if you do not understand what I'm writing it down, you will understand it once I draw the diagram, and it will be more clear. So let me just write this statement and then draw the diagram. So Hamilton's principle chooses the path where the variation of S, okay, so since there are many different possible paths, it must choose the correct path, right? That is the use of our Hamilton's principle. So Hamilton's principle chooses the correct path, or it chooses the path, okay, it chooses the path where the variation of S, about the chosen path, is zero to first order. What does this mean? It means out of all these possible paths, it chooses a path corresponding to the correct path, where about this path, if we calculate the variation of the action, that variation will be 0 to the first order in S. Okay, so that is how Hamilton's principle chooses the correct path. So let us illustrate this using some diagram, and to make it easier to get a better intuitive feeling, I am going to use two-dimensional Cartesian coordinates and the time axis, of course. So we have our y-axis, our x-axis, and the time axis like this. So we already know x1, y1, t1 and x2, y2, t2. That means let this be t1, this be x1, this be y1, and let this be t2, this be x2, this be y2. Then what this means is that we know this particular point, okay, which is going to be our point 1, and we also know this particular point, okay, which is our point 2. And what I mean by all the different possible paths, how can the system move from point 1 to point 2? So it can move like this. Let's say this is first path. I am going to call this as path A. Let me choose a different color. This is some other path, path B. This is some other path, path C. And let's draw some funny path also, which is path D. Okay. Now remember, here these paths never go reverse in time. So this D, what I have drawn here, this loop, is actually like the helical of a spring, the helical shape of a spring, which means this never goes in this direction. Okay, it is always moving forward along this axis. So you have to imagine it that way. So these are, let's say, the different paths which the system may take, but we don't know which of them is correct. Now we already know that it has to start at point 1 and end at point 2. Okay, therefore it becomes meaningless to compare these paths with paths such as this, which let me use a different color, which go from point 1 and end at some different point, point 3, okay, which we don't know, and let me call this point E. It becomes meaningless to compare E with A, B, C, D, because E doesn't pass it does begin at 1, but it doesn't end at 2. Therefore it is impossible for the system to traverse the path E, because this path E never reaches the point 2. So that is eliminated among all the possible paths. Okay, so what do we have here? So this is an important point to remember. This is important to understand when Hamilton's principle will fail. So Hamilton's principle will only compare those paths which begin at point 1 and end at point 2. Comparing A with E does not make any sense because first of all, E is not a possible path. So you should not compare A, B, C, D with the path E when you take the variation of the action integral. Okay. So therefore what we have is the paths A, B, C and D are what I will call as possible paths. Possible paths. Let's assume one of these is the actual path. Okay. But the path E is not a possible path. Not a possible path. Okay. So why? Because it doesn't end at point 2. Okay. So therefore it becomes meaningless to compare path E with the other paths. So therefore it's meaningless to compare E with other paths because E is not possible at all. The system doesn't take the path E. And when we said Hamilton's principle chooses the path where the action is the least or minimum, okay, then it may so happen that the action corresponding to E is the least as compared to action corresponding to A, B, C and D. But that doesn't mean that E is the correct path because it's not a possible path first of all. So that is what I mean by we cannot compare the path E with path A, B, C and D. Okay. Alright. So let us say that B is the correct path. Okay. So if B is the correct path, remember we don't know this, we need to get B as the correct path from the Hamilton's principle. But let's say that B is the correct path, somebody else has already told you, but now you want to say that from Hamilton's principle will predict B as the path which is taken by the system. Okay. So this means if B has to be the correct path, this implies that the variation of S about the path B is 0. This must be 0. Okay. So for this to happen, our Euler-Lagrange equations must be satisfied. Only then the variation about B will be 0. Okay. So the Lagrangian about the path B, in the path B, will follow this condition, and therefore the variation in S about path B will be 0, of course, to the first order, and that is how the Hamilton's principle will choose path B as the correct path. Okay. Now when we solve this equation, in our case I ranges from 1 to 2 because we have X and Y. So Q1 equal to X and Q2 equal to Y, say. Okay. And so correspondingly there will be two such equations, and therefore solving these equations, as we have already seen, solving these equations, we will get 4 constants. We get 4 constants due to integration. Okay. Now how do we find the values of these constants? So to find these constants, we use the boundary condition, which is the fact that we know x1, y1, t1 and x2, y2, t2. Okay. So we use this fact and apply it in our resulting solution and solve the two equations to get the arbitrary constants, the 4 arbitrary constants. Okay. So if we know x1, y1 at t1 and x2, y2 at t2, we can use these two conditions to solve for the unknown constants, from which finally, so solving this, finally we get x of t and y of t. Okay, remember we get it as a function of t. And from this we can get x dot of t, y dot of t, x double dot of t, y double dot of t, and so on. Okay, which means that we know, once we know x of t and y of t, this implies we know path of the system, along with not only do we know the path of the system, which means all the position coordinates which the system takes, but we also know the dynamical information. Okay, so along with dynamical information, which means that we know time taken by the system to traverse this path, which means we know the time taken by the system to traverse the path. Okay, this is what we get. This is the information that we get from our Hamilton's principle after we solve our Euler-Lagrange equation and get the equations of motion and find the constants, and therefore get x of t and y of t. So x of t and y of t not only tells us what is the path that the system takes, it also tells us how much time the system takes to go from point 1 to point 2. Okay, so this is what we need to keep in mind about what our Hamilton's principle gives us and where it is useful. Okay, now what if I give you a scenario wherein we have the following information. Okay, so what if instead of knowing x1, y1, t1 and x1, x2, y2, t2, instead of knowing x1, y1, t1 and x2, y2, t2, instead of knowing this, we just know x1, y1 and x2, y2. Let me put a comma here. We know x1, y1, x2, y2, and the fact that the total energy of the system is conserved. Okay, so we know that it begins at x1, y1 and ends at x2, y2, coordinates only. Remember, we don't know the time. Plus, we know that the energy of this system is conserved, and the energy is conserved, and the fact that the energy has a value equal to E. Okay, so we know that the energy is conserved, and the fact that the total energy of the system is E. Okay, so instead of knowing this T1 and T2, now we know that the energy is conserved and the value of the total energy of the system. So here we have lost the information about how much time the system must take to go from path 1 to path 2. But instead, I give you the information regarding the total energy of the system, along with the condition that for the system chosen, the energy is conserved. Plus, we also know what is the initial coordinates and final coordinates. What we don't know is the time taken by the system to go from the coordinate 1 to coordinate 2. Okay, so to summarize that, therefore we know the following. First, we know that x1, y1, and we can arbitrarily choose the starting point as x1, y1, and therefore we can assign some time t0 to that. We can, for instance, you can consider this as the origin of time. It doesn't matter, because all that we are concerned with is to know how the system goes from point 1 to point 2. So we can always take point 1 as the starting position of time. Okay, so we can, from this information we can say that, we can call this as t0, that is some starting position of time. But this doesn't tell us how much time it takes for it to go from point 1 to point 2. Okay, so therefore we know x1, y1 and some t0, which I'm going to call it as the starting point of time, and we know x2, y2. Okay, secondly, we know the total energy whose value is represented by E, plus we know that dou E by dou T equal to 0, which means our energy is conserved. So this implies that our Lagrangian is not explicitly dependent on time, which implies our Hamiltonian is not explicitly dependent on time. Okay, plus we, as I already told, so this implies that therefore we don't, this is very important, we don't have any information about time. I haven't mentioned time here at all, any information about time here at all, except here the fact that we can choose that point as the some time reference. We don't know what the value of t0 is, but we can choose it as some reference. Okay, our choice, because what matters is the difference of the time taken by the system to reach to and when it started. Okay, so if we know only this much, so instead of knowing t1 and t2, we know these three facts, can we still find the path which is taken by the system? Okay, so let me give you two questions. So the first question is, can we still find the correct path? Find the correct path. Okay, and the second question is, if yes, can we use Hamilton's principle to find the correct path? If yes, can we use Hamilton's principle, which is the one which we have seen so far, Hamilton's principle, to find the correct path? To find the correct path. By correct path, of course, I mean the path which the system takes in accordance with the laws of motion. Okay, so before I explain the reasons for the answer to these questions, I'm just going to give away the answer for now and slowly come up with the reason to that. Okay, so the answer to the first question is yes. Okay, and the answer to the second question is surprisingly no. So when I say yes, you might wonder, how is this answer yes? Okay, so how can we still find the correct path? And the answer to this particular question will be given at the climax of the video, so wait for the climax. Okay, but of course with this answer there is a small catch. Okay, there is a catch which we are going to see later. Okay, so the thing is that the answer to this question is yes, we can still find the correct path. Okay, how? We will look at it at the end of this video. Okay, we will just mention it at the end of the video how, and we'll look at it in detail in the upcoming videos. And the answer to this question is no. We cannot use Hamilton's principle to find the correct path in this case. So why is the answer no here? And that is what we are going to discuss further in this video. Okay, why cannot we use Hamilton's principle when we have this information and find the correct path which is taken by the system? Okay. So the reason is because without knowing the endpoints in time, without knowing the endpoints in time, which is t1 and t2 as we had before, it makes no sense to minimize the action. It makes no sense to minimize the action. I'm going to explain this statement with an illustration. So this statement, when I say that it makes no sense to minimize the action, in a sense is same as saying that it makes no sense to compare path E with path A, B, C and D. Okay, because here we are considering different endpoints in time, but in our case we do not know what the endpoints in time are. Therefore the endpoint in time can be anything. Okay, so let us understand this with similar diagram, but now just to make the diagram easier to draw, I am going to consider one dimension. So consider 1D now. Okay, and I'm going to draw the different paths in the x versus t space, and let me call this as t0, let me call this as x1, let me call this as x2. So these three information, now since we are working in one dimensional space, we only know x1 and x2. There is no information about y1 and y2 because we are working in one dimensional case. We know the total energy and we know the fact that the energy is conserved. Okay, so the one dimensional problem is to find what is the path. So we know that the system starts at this point, which I'm going to call it as point 1, and we just know the fact that it ends at the coordinate 2, which is x2. Okay, but how does it go from point 1 to point 2? We do not know. That is what we want to find. Okay, so let us consider the different possibilities. So let us consider different paths. So let's say that this is one path. Okay, I'm going to call this path A again and use a different color and call this path B. It again comes back to same point, let's say path B. Let's take another path which goes like this, path C. Remember, these paths must be continuous and differentiable. Okay, and let's take another path which, let's say, goes like this and call this path D. Okay, now all of these path A, B, C and D, all of them will have the same value of total energy E, just like in this case how ABCD had the same value of total time taken for the particle or object to go from point 1 to point 2. Okay, so let me write that down. So here A, B, C, D took same time t given by t2 minus t1 to go from 1 to 2, whereas here A, B, C, D have the same total energy E plus the energy is conserved along these paths. Only then can these four paths become different possibilities through which the system can move. If either of these paths did not have the total energy as E, then it violates the fact that we already know that the system's energy, total energy is E. Therefore, the possible paths which we consider, okay, should also have the same total energy E. So if I take some other path, let us say path E, let me use a different color. Let's say this is path E, where total energy is some E dash, then it makes no sense to compare E with A, B, C and D, because this is not a possible path, because the system is now having a totally different energy. But we already know that the system has the energy E. Okay, so it makes no sense to compare path E with A, B, C, D, because E is not possible. Even though it ends at x2 and we don't know how much time it takes, but the fact that it has the energy E dash makes this path not possible. Okay. Similarly, if we have say some other path where the path is say something like this, I'll call it as F, but in F energy is not conserved. Energy is not conserved. Even this is not a possible path, because we already know that the energy must be conserved. Okay, so therefore similarly we can't compare F with A, B and so on, C and D. Okay, so the only paths which we are going to compare are the paths A, B, C, D, and similarly many other paths which have the same total energy E, and along this entire paths the energy must be conserved. Only then can we say that they belong to the set of possible paths. Okay, all right. So then corresponding to each of these paths, so then we can define the action SA as integral from T1 to T0 to TA, where our TA is this particular guy. We don't know what this value is, remember. So TA, which is also equal to TB in this case. This is TC. This is over here TD. Okay, TD. So I can define, remember we don't know what TA is. Okay, so let us just name it as TA. I can define an action SA, which we have seen as integral from T0 to TA dt. Similarly SB as integral T0 to TB L dt. Similarly SC as integral T0 to TC L dt, and SD as integral T0 to TD L dt. Okay, and what does our principle of least action say, or the Hamilton's principle, what does it say? It says that it chooses the paths among all the possible paths wherein the action integral is the minimum. And here we are saying the possible paths are A, B, C, D, but we notice that these do not end at the same point, because we don't know where it is going to end. It can end after half an hour, it can end after 10 seconds, it can end after 15 minutes, we do not know. Okay, so we have no information about the end point time. So, but we can anyways define these various types of action in this manner. Then the question is the following. If we, let's say, consider when we calculate these values, it comes out that SA is equal to SC. I'm just taking this random relation, and SA is greater than SB is greater than SD, let's say. Okay, So now we find that SD is minimum among all these different possible paths. But does that make SD the correct path? Okay, that is the question. So since SD is minimum, okay, then is SD the action is the path D the correct path? So let me, is D the correct path? That is the question. Because the Hamilton's principle says that among all the possible paths, the path corresponding to minimum action value is going to be the correct path. So here we find that, let us say that SD is the minimum. So can we conclude that SD is indeed the correct path? Okay, the answer is no here, because in Hamilton's principle, when we considered here, the possible paths that we considered ended up at the same instant of time t2. Okay, so we had a specific starting point and a specific ending point, and all the possible paths which we compared started at point 1 and ended at point 2 at the specific times t1 and t2. Whereas here, the different possible paths begin at the same time but end at different times. Okay, so it becomes meaningless to compare these paths using an action which is defined in this form. Okay, because this form, when we minimize, is correct only if we consider the various paths whose endpoints are the same. But here the endpoints are different. Okay, so even though among A, B, C, D, SD corresponds to the minimum action, but then if we assume that D is indeed the correct path, it may not be the case that among all the possible paths which start at point 1 and end at this point, let's say if you consider these paths, it may not be the case that among these three paths the D is minimum. If D is not minimum among these three paths, which is this two white paths and the brown D path, but D is minimum among A, B, C and D, we cannot conclude that D is indeed the correct path, because when you consider this point and this point as the boundary points, the action corresponding to D is not the minimum when you consider all possible paths which begin at this point and end at this point. So that is the reason why we cannot use Hamilton's principle in this case and choose a correct path in this manner by just knowing that SD is minimum among SB and SA. Because even if SD is minimum among these, if you consider all the paths which begin and end at the same points as the path D, the path corresponding to SD may not be minimum among all those paths. Okay, so that's a lot of things to write, so I'll just shorten it down, and if you do not get it, just listen to what I just told again by going back in the video. So the answer is no here, because in Hamilton's principle, we need to compare paths. We need to compare paths having the same boundary conditions. Having the same boundary conditions. Okay. Here SA and SB. Okay. So if you see here, so whatever I told just now is what this statement says. Okay, because it is meaningful, the Hamilton's principle is meaningful only when you consider paths having the same end points and the beginning points. when you compare paths having different endpoints, then it does not make sense to compare them in this manner using Hamilton's principle. Okay. So here SA and SB, if you note, okay, I am considering it to be having the same boundary conditions. Okay, so here SA and SB have the same boundary conditions. Okay, but SA, SC, SD have different boundary conditions. But SA, SC and SD have different boundary conditions. So therefore, what this statement says is that to compare the paths, they should have the same boundary conditions, whereas here these paths have different boundary conditions except for only SA and SB. But then we saw that SD is less than SA and SB. So naturally you would think SD will be the correct path, but this is wrong because it makes no sense to compare these paths in this manner. Okay. So for SD to be the correct path, what should happen then? For SD to be the correct path, what is the real criteria for SD to be the correct path? We need to know, we need to know that TD is the endpoint time. So unless we know that TD itself is the endpoint time, first of all, we cannot say that D is the correct path. Because for Hamilton's principle, we need to know what is the initial time and the final time. So unless we know TD, first of all, we cannot choose D as the minimum path. It makes no sense. Okay? Because the Hamilton's principle, as we have seen, requires the information about TD. But not only that, it should also, the path D should also correspond to the path where if you compare all the possible paths which start at point 1 and end at point 2 corresponding to T equal to TD, then that the variation of the action about that path should be 0. Okay, so here TD is the endpoint time plus variation of S about D is 0. Only if these conditions are met, only then we can say that SD is the correct path. Okay, otherwise we cannot say that the SD is correct path. So which implies even though SD is minimum among SA, SB, SC, SD, it doesn't guarantee, that is the fact that SD is minimum along as compared to SA, SB, SC, this fact alone doesn't guarantee that the variation of S about D is 0, because to calculate variation of S, we must consider so I'm going to continue writing this here. We must consider varied paths that all end at the same point. Varied paths that all end at x2, td. Only then we can say that the variation in S is should be 0. And if that condition is met, only then our path corresponding to SD will be minimum. Okay. So all of these things tells us that therefore we cannot decide which is the correct path using Hamilton's principle, because we don't know the endpoint times. Okay, so this is the reason we cannot use the Hamilton's principle. So therefore we must use some other variational principle. We cannot use Hamilton's principle, but instead we should introduce some other variational principle in this case. Okay, and this variational principle should make sure that it compares all the paths that start at x1 y1 and ends at x2 y2 without considering the time. Okay, so this should, so we must come up with a variational principle wherein it makes sense to compare these paths, wherein they may end at different times, but it is sure that they start at x1 and end at x2, but and have the same total value, energy value, and the fact that the energy is conserved along these paths. So we have to use a variational principle which can compare only such paths. Okay, so this should compare all the paths that start, if you take a two-dimensional case as here, as we took here, I just drew one-dimensional because it is easier to draw and to imagine, of course. Here in general, let's say two-dimension, x1 y1 and end at x2 y2 without considering the time. Okay, so the variation principle that does this is nothing but the Maupertuis principle. Okay, so the variational principle that does this is the Maupertuis principle. And so now we have established what are the circumstances under which the Hamilton's principle will not give us the required result, but we have to sort after some other type of variational principle which takes into the account that we do not know what the endpoint times are, but instead we know just the total energy and the fact that the energy is conserved. So this new variational principle that we have not yet formulated, but we are going to see, is nothing but the Maupertuis principle, and therefore we have finished setting up the circumstances wherein this principle can be used, and therefore we have come to the end of this video. So in the next video we are going to formulate this principle and understand what it says and what it means and so on. So thank you for watching. See you next.